We'd like to take a minute to thank the California Council on Teacher Education's board for sponsoring this webinar today on building a pipeline for Black male teacher success. Please continue to follow the @CalCouncil Twitter handle, and you can keep this conversation going by using the hashtag CCTE2020. So I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Bettina to take us on to begin our webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Nicole. Welcome to our webinar. So we would like to begin first with a little bit of introduction to the folks who put together this webinar. And so we're going to begin by briefly introducing ourselves, our professional positions, and our roles in CCTE, as well as our roles in the webinar today. So we'll start with Dr. Ernest Black.
Good afternoon. I am Ernest Black. I'm the System-Wide Director for Cal State Teach. Cal State Teach is an online multiple subject CSU teacher preparation program. And my role in CCTE is that as a board member, this is the beginning of my second year on the board. And I'm one of the presenters in this webinar today, and I'm going to act a little bit later as an interviewer as well.
Thanks, Ernest. Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Howard. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Redlands, and I'm also program coordinator for our multiple subject, single subject, our Master's in Learning and Teaching program. And my role, I'm a former board member for California Council on Teacher Education. I'm currently co-chair for their policy committee and co-chair for their technology and teacher education SIG. So my role today is to talk a little bit with you about some of the data and to discuss what the data tell us about our Black educators, specifically Black male educators in the field, and then to facilitate our Q&A.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm Dr. Bettina Shea. I am a professor and the director of teacher education at the University of La Verne, the La Fetra College of Education. I, like Ernest, am also in my second year on the CCTE, California Council on Teacher Education board, and am coming in as a new co-chair of the Communications Committee. With Nicole, I'll be helping present some of the data, and then also we'll be talking about some action steps that you can take in response to some of the things that you're hearing today in your various roles as we look to build a pipeline for Black male teachers. So I'm going to start with the purpose of the session, and you can see our purpose elaborated in this slide, but really what we want to do in this webinar is to begin by reviewing the data on the need for more Black male teachers, both nationally and in our state, and we'll look at kind of disparities between Black male teachers and the students that we serve here in California and nationally. We'll then move to the central part of our webinar today, where we'll be able to hear from Black male teachers and teacher educators associated with one of the larger credential programs in the state about their experiences, both K-12 and in teacher education. And then we'll move to offer specific actions, both individually and institutionally, that can help us to begin building the pipelines that we want to see Black male students and teachers succeed in education. And so we are teachers, and we wanted to make sure that this webinar had an element of engagement for all of you. And so Nicole is about to drop our first poll question. And you'll see the poll come up both on the Zoom poll, and if you'd like, you can participate directly through polleverywhere.com. You can use the prompts right there, either that QR code or the prompts that you see. And our question is, when did you have your first teacher of color? So you should see that both in the Zoom poll and by following that QR code. When did you have your first teacher of color? And so you can see from the poll results that Nicole is sharing that actually we have a high number of folks who had a teacher of color in elementary school, That was by far the highest number, which is really great. And then we had then your first teacher of color in middle school, high school, undergrad. But if we look, even though our highest percentage was in elementary school, that's still only 41%, meaning that 59% didn't get their first teacher of color until after elementary school. And if we look at the numbers, almost 27% didn't get a teacher of color until post-secondary. And then we have 8% of the folks that are attending here today that participated in our poll who have never had a teacher of color. So we'll move on to our next poll question, Nicole. Is when did you have your first Black male teacher? So when did you have your first Black male teacher? And thank you, Marcos. Yeah, 28% never had a teacher of color in K-12. And thank you for those of you in our chat. I love the comment from Yolan that she was blessed to have all Black female teachers throughout elementary school, first through sixth grade. And from Jason saying elementary school in fourth grade, learning about Black Wall Street, Juneteenth, and apartheid. So really appreciate some of your answers as you're going through the chat. And hi to Lisa.
Wow. Go ahead, Bettina. I see you're ready to jump in. Yeah.
So when we look at these numbers, when we move from talking about all teachers of color to Black male teachers, we see the striking difference in the poll results that you can see, where 38% of folks attending this webinar have never had a Black male teacher, right? And we're talking P20 here, right, in the pipeline. And 30% of folks who have had Black male teachers had to wait until their post-secondary education. So if we aggregate the numbers, K-12, only 32% of you actually had a Black male teacher in your K-12 experiences, 32% of the people that participated in the poll. Right.
And I see someone asking how many participants do we have today? We have, it looks like about 150, 130 or so responded to this particular poll. Give or take a few, because I'm looking at the numbers here. It could be slightly lower than that for the responses.
And so when we were thinking about these questions, we actually started and came up with these questions because we were thinking about our own experiences. And so in my experience, I did have a teacher in my K-12. I had to wait until high school before I had my first teacher of color, and he was a Latinx male. But when I thought about my first Black male teacher, I did not have a Black male professor until graduate school in education. And then I was blessed to have two professors, one of whom continues to be a mentor and make a very large difference for me. Shout out to Jabari Mahiri at UC Berkeley. And Nicole also kind of shared her experiences as well with teachers of color and Black male teachers.
Yes, definitely. So for me, I think my first Black teacher was elementary school. However, my first Black male teacher wasn't until my undergrad at UCLA. Dr. Walter Allen, and that experience definitely was a positive experience for me in thinking about my own trajectory in the field of education. So I definitely will continue to talk about the importance of and what can come of those experiences for us, but that was a critical point for me in my academic journey. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share again because Bettina's going to take us into talking a bit more about the data.
Right, so when we look at actually that response to poll question 1, in terms of who had teachers of color and when you had teachers of color, it's actually great, but a little surprising that people had teachers of color so early, that so many of us had teachers of color as early as elementary school. Because when we look at the racial demographics of teachers in the United States, we see that 83% of our teachers in 2003, 2004 were white, and just a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, right? We still see 80% of our teachers being white nationwide. We're doing a little bit better, and you can't even, there's a higher percentage nationally of Black teachers and some like Hispanic teachers as well, or Latinx teachers. But these data are nationally reflected. We wanted to then bring it to a California context. So Nicole, you want to take that? Oh, Nicole, you're muted.
Of course, and I had a lot to say in that short moment of time anyway. So the racial demographics of teachers in California, when you look at the ethnic distribution for public school teachers, these data are from 2018 and 2019. You can see here that we have 3,705 Black male teachers. That represents 1.2% of the teacher population. And then when you look at our, even looking at our white female teachers, that represents about 45% of our white women teachers, 45% of the teaching population. These data are interesting as we think about just the polls we just experienced, right? That we are having less of an experience early on in having a Black male teacher. And this speaks to also the demographics in California. And these numbers are consistent with the 2017, 2018 numbers, as well as the 2015, 2016 numbers. So as we move forward and we look at our racial demographics of students in California, this is the ethnic distribution across our public schools. So you will see here that for our African American students, we do have 5.4%, but one thing that's very important for us to think about is the fact that when students identify, when they self-identify, that sometimes if they are identifying with two or more races, not Hispanic, they are expected to choose one category. So we aren't capturing all of the data in the African American category, but even still, other things worth looking at and exploring in the future. We want to think about those disparities between who we have as teachers and then the population of students who we have. And this can be said as we look at our Black students and our Black teachers, and even as we look at our Hispanic or Latino, right? 54.6% of the percentage of students represented are from the Hispanic or Latino population, whereas 21% of the teachers in the field are of the same racial demographic. So we just wanted to give you the larger picture of the data in California, and before we move into looking specifically at Cal State Teach and their demographics.
And I just wanted to add really quick before we turn it over to Ernest, Nicole, that part of the reason that this is so compelling is that we know that teachers of color are, first of all, more effective with students of color. And there's also been research that shows that all students, whether they are teachers or students of color or white students, actually prefer learning from teachers of color. And so one of the things that was brought up in a panelist comment was that perhaps the prevalence of people in the room having teachers of color in elementary school was because many of us are people of color. And so, yes, it's important to see that reflection, but our focus is that having more Black male teachers, having more teachers of color is important for all students. And so we really just want to make that stance clear. So we're going to turn it over to Ernest, who's going to talk about our focal program, Cal State Teach.
So good afternoon again. Cal State Teach, we're going to look at these demographics and we're going to peel it apart for a little bit. Cal State Teach is seen as one of the more diverse teacher preparation programs in the CSU system. So I'm going to start there. Now, before I really look at the data, I'm going to tell you that we looked last year at the numbers of Black males who had entered the Cal State Teach program. And we looked at a 10-year time period. In that 10-year time period, between 2009 and 2019, we had admitted 63 Black men into the program. 63. Out of that 63, only half of those, roughly about 30 of them, completed the program. That other percentage did not get past. We're a 3-term program, and they did not get past the first term, or they did not start the second term, I should say. Now, there could be any variety of reasons why this is the case. It could be, as we all hear about all the tests, the CSET, the CBEST, it could be those. It could be that they weren't nurtured enough in our program. It could be any number of reasons. So we took some time and we talked to them about it. And we'll get into that in a little bit when we talk with our Brandon Miller here, one of our Cal State Teach program completers and current credentialed teacher in the state of California. But I really want you to take a look at the data that we have here when we look at the number of male candidates, which we're an elementary multiple subject program. So the number of male candidates is always consistently lower than our number of female candidates. But when you really look at the number of white male candidates, for example, versus our number of African-American or Black candidates, you see that disparity there between that 108 for academic year 2018-19 versus that 13. And what does that mean? And what do we do to change it? Before we move on to the next slide, I want to also offer this information. Bettina told us some really good information about why we should have teachers of color and who benefits from when we have it. But the other piece is that, very often we look at Black men in society as very menacing, terrifying. I mean, you hear those adjectives when we hear reporters on the news, for example, talk about Black men. We heard, a lot of disparaging comments about George Floyd, for example. So when we have Black men as educators, what we're saying is that we're giving our students access to Black men. So now that changes the narrative a bit because they've had personal experience with the Black man. So now they can say, well, no, not all Black men are menacing because my teacher is this, or my teacher's tall and he doesn't do that. My teacher's strong and he doesn't do that. So we really want to make sure that we engage Black men in this process of education. And can we move on to the next slide?
And so in light of that, what we hope that you will do as a lens, as you're thinking about your participation in this webinar, is to really think about the role that your program has played in the success or destruction of Black men, right? And Black children in general, right? So as Ernest began to unpack the statistics from Cal State Teach, what he did was look at the data and then look at what he's seen and his experience, and through that lens, really think about the role that his program has played in the success or the destruction of Black men. And then from that stance as a program director, he can then begin to think about his own individual role within a program, because we know that we are embedded within structures and that our individual experiences and our individual actions are different than the structures in which we're embedded. And so we want people to kind of sit with that and think through that lens as we're moving forward. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Ernest now, because we're going to move to the central part of our webinar, which is really to center Black male educator voices within this context of Cal State Teach.
And one quick reminder as we do that, if you have specific questions for at this point, please remember to drop them in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we curate those questions as we center our Black male voices.
Okay, thank you. I am going to just very briefly, I saw something in the chat that I want to address very quickly. When I said, that we see Black men as menacing. I'm going to give you an example of that, and I'm not going to take too much time. I had this favorite suit, which was Armani, but who cares, right? So I'm in my favorite suit at a university, going to my desk as a director of a teacher preparation program. I get onto the elevator. Right behind me is a young white student who gets onto the elevator. Cut off shorts, tank top. The elevator door closes. She grabs her purse and holds it so tight as if I'm going to steal her purse on that elevator. She clearly thought I was menacing. She clearly didn't think very much of me. So that whole menacing thing, no, it's not every Black man, it's not every person thinks that a Black man is menacing. But in our encounters, and I'm sure many Black men have had very similar encounters, grocery store, car wash, wherever you may be. And it's those encounters that make us understand that our collective role has not been fully examined, especially in the realm of education. So I said a little bit about me. I'm going to ask Mr. Miller, Brandon Miller, to talk about his experience both as a Cal State Teach student and as a Black male with a multiple subject credential.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As stated before, I'm Brandon Miller. I am going into my 9th year as a teacher from the Cal State Teach program. So I started the Cal State Teach program as an intern teacher in 2012. Upon completing the program, I've gone on to teach elementary school at Watts Learning Center, and I am currently a 2nd grade teacher at Wilders Preparatory Academy in Inglewood. Again, when I started the program in 2012, one of the benefits was, again, it being online and offering the intern teacher track, which allowed me to continue working. One of the drawbacks of a lot of the other programs was I essentially was going to have to stop working in order to complete the program. And at that time, I had 2 children. My 3rd child was on the way. Not working was not an option. And so, again, I enrolled in the program. My first teaching position was at a middle school, Thurgood Marshall Middle School, which is now closed. Again, I was able to hit the ground running as a teacher. And one of the best things that I got out of the program was my advisor, Professor Tenanye, who, really just kind of took a vested interest in me specifically. And then also with Dr. Black, who was the director over the program at the time, who just, really worked with me to make sure that, I didn't become the 50+% of the students that were dropping out. There were not a lot of us. When I started the program and we met on campus, there were maybe 2 or 3 people that looked like me in the room. And it was just, it was very off-putting, but then at the same time, it helped me further understand why I was as driven to do what I was doing. I've been around children my entire life. I've been in spaces where Black men typically aren't, with my mother being in law enforcement, which we're not in a lot, and then in education, where, again, there's just not a lot of people that look like me doing the educating. We've got a lot of security guards, we got a lot of paraprofessionals, but not a lot of Black male teachers. And my driving force in most of what I do is to offer that space. I know firsthand, like I wasn't allowed to answer the poll question, but I didn't have my first Black male teacher until I got to Howard. And I went to school in Inglewood and Los Angeles my entire life. So to say that I was in a predominantly Black area at schools that were predominantly Black for the most of my, K through 12 career, and did not have one Black male teacher. I wanted to be part of changing that narrative and making sure that, especially for our Black boys, that they see somebody, that represents them, that knows, that would understand them. And so, through the Cal State Teach program, Dr. Black, Dr. Stewart, worked with me. We had a cohort of just our Black male students in the Cal State Teach program, and saying, like, look, what you're going to go through is different than everybody else. What's going to be expected of you is different than everybody else, but here's how we navigate that. And I've been able to use that in, now there's actually 2, male teachers in elementary at my school. And I was so excited to get a second one, and being able to use that with him being younger than me to be able to help guide him. It's been great, because I think that I'm seen as an asset on the campuses that I teach. I'm seen as, I'm still getting, to this day, I'm getting, college graduation invitations from former students because of what me being their teacher meant to them. And so, again, I was really glad to have been able to complete the program and all the work that I've been able to do since.
Brandon, can you talk a little bit about what it's like right now for you to be a Black man on campus?
So, well, right now, of course, with these uncertain times, it's a little bit different. But in general, when we're in the classroom, and again, I'm teaching at a school with the 94%, I think, African American population. It's so important that they see a Black male teacher. I actually have a waiting list of students trying to get into my class specifically because they know that I offer a different perspective, a different way of attacking things. And it's a dual-edged sword. What it becomes is you become valued as this different role, because again, these Black boys and we talked about the idea of menacing and what that means. The studies have shown that educationally, our Black boys are getting suspended more often, they're getting expelled more often, and it's because they're the same behaviors that are exhibited in counterparts of other races, of other cultures, are seen as something different. They're labeled as something different. And as a Black male educator, I have that perspective. I know what that looks like, but then I also know enough to be able to explain it to the parents. So I've had the candid conversations with parents that, look, we need to work on X, Y, and Z, because what could be playful and talkative is seen as disruptive and disrespectful, and that becomes a thing that becomes grounds for suspension, so on and so forth. Black, that. We had a student that was in our mentoring program that said he didn't know that Black men went to college. And, he thought you only go to college if you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor, and everybody else just starts working. Being able to get to these kids as young as I get them, I have them in 2nd grade, and being able to explain to them what it means to be successful and, how to carry yourself, and, just showing them, showing up to work every day in a shirt and tie, and just showing them that you can dress up for something other than church and court, it is huge. And then, but then what it becomes is, the other teachers in the school, even the administrative staff at times, they look at it and say, well, he's the one that can handle all of the rough cases. And so you become the disciplinarian, you become if he gets kicked out of class and we can't deal with it, we're going to send him to Mr. Miller's class. I've had 5, 6, 7 students. I don't even know where they came from. They just show up, and my teacher told me to come in here, and, and so it sometimes bothers me, and I do bring it up because I don't want my only relationship with some of these students who aren't in my class to be that of me administering discipline, because then now again it becomes they send them to me to be scared. And that doesn't help, undo the stereotypes that we're looking to undo. It reinforces it. The Black man is the scary guy. You don't want to get sent to him. And so, you have to live in this duality, and trying to be the voice that these students need to hear, and not just somebody else that's yelling at them or being the angry Black guy, as it were.
And Brandon, one day we're going to have an entire webinar on just that whole discipline and what we're expected to do, all those extra things that we're expected to do at the school site that have nothing to do with curriculum or standards. But when we get to that point, I'm gonna call you because we need that point. I remember those days too. Dr. Stewart is with us as well. Dr. Stewart is one of our faculty at Cal State Teach, and I'll turn over the floor to Dr. Stewart.
Man, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad you all decided to spend your busy days with us. I know you had a lot of running to do out in the street. Oh, my bad, it's a pandemic, sorry. But you're here, so I appreciate that. I'm glad to be here and offer my point of view, which is slightly different because I never like to really talk about retention and how we retain them until we go back to the beginning of our so-called teacher pipeline. So as you saw in the description, I'm going to take a specific quote from the description of the webinar. And I think it was the third bullet or fourth bullet: to offer specific actions on both individual and institutional levels that each of us can take to begin building pipelines for Black men to succeed in education, teacher education in schools. What I like to add to that is that after we build said pipelines, we need to replace that long cylindrical sieve currently masquerading as a pipeline that is detrimental for Black males for the entire length, that is finally constructed and institutional, right? Therefore, I call it a sieve. There are ways where we drop out from beginning to end, P20. And also, one thing we have to address is that teacher preparation and America's public schools are overwhelmingly white. And so what we do as we move towards offering specific actions, one thing we have to do is we have to refuse to let whiteness be used as power in our teacher preparation programs and in our schools. All right? So as I move in, we need to consider some data, and this is how I will frame it. If you go back to what Kunjufu presents, that fourth grade slump or that dive that happens when kids are 8 or 9 years old, right now, at that time, those students were born around 2010, 11, 12. Between 2010 and 2012, Black males were 21 times more likely to be killed by the police than white males. And if you think of that and all non-lethal shows of force, it would greatly trump that 21 times. So this age group is at that critical junction. Next, Black males overall are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police. 13% of the American population approximately are Black, but Blacks only have about 2.78% of its wealth. Blacks are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than whites, and Black men are well over 40% of the prison population. All those are factors that influence our students as they come in school, and then we expect Black children to act like white children. Like Malcolm X said, right? Kittens can be born in an oven, but that don't make them biscuits. So what I want to do is I want to provide a quick anecdote from my beginnings to now. I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware. Now, I grew up in 2 parts of Wilmington, which are the 2 poorest areas in the city. Wilmington ranks, or in 2014, and it still ranks high in the top 10. the most violent small city in the United States. At one point, Wilmington's murder rate was 36 per 100,000 if you extrapolate. Doesn't have 100,000 people, right? The media told us at one point that the gang problem in LA was out of control. But what they don't tell you is the next bullet I'm gonna hit is that Watts carried the burden of the homicide rate in Los Angeles. Los Angeles never reached beyond low 20s. I can't remember what it was right now. But at the time when I was a principal, Watts adjacent, from the time my students were born to the time they reached me in 9th grade, the homicide rate in South LA, in that area, was 90 per 100,000. We've never seen anything like this. If you're a TV fan, you say, oh, Baltimore, The Wire, it was never above 40. So you're looking at some very specific circumstances that you have to cater to with the trauma that students bring to school. I could get you a couple anecdotes. I'll give you this one because Brandon might not know this one, being in Inglewood. I have had stories confirmed by several colleagues that grew up in Inglewood that a freight train just stopped on the middle of the track one day and it was filled with assault weapons. And this was in the early 90s. This is Inglewood, California, right? So what does that mean? We don't need to go into that. Let's stay on track. So what we have to realize when we look at these specific things is that one thing we're often fooled by is that racism is not a series of one-offs by these bad actors and bad apples. We hear a lot of talk that today regarding our police officers, but we never acknowledge, or we rarely acknowledge, how racism is systemic, how it is structural, and how it breeds violence, whether it is symbolic, going back to Giroux, or whether it is physical. So as a very result of that, young Black children are programmatically and institutionally ejected from schools just for being Black. Mr. Miller talked about that. Some more data to continue framing. Black students make up 19% of all students enrolled in preschool, but 47% of the suspensions. They're almost 4 times more likely to receive out-of-school suspensions in preschool. They're almost 4 times more likely to receive out-of-school suspensions in K-12. They're almost 2.5 times more likely to be, let's say, set up for school-related arrest. So we have to think our bias, and in some instances, more often than we probably think, straight up racism, and the message that these actions, implicit and explicit, send to students. It informs them simply that they are not welcome in educational spaces. So I like to borrow from Bettina Love here, going way back to Patricia Williams. If you're not hip, get hip, the idea of spirit murdering our children. This is what happens. The souls of Black children, every day, their spirits are murdered. I'm gonna hit you with an exact quote. I have a lot of bullet points, but I gotta hit you with this quote. The intangible violence towards Black children is less visceral and seemingly less tragic than the physical acts of murder at the hands of white mobs, kidnapping and killing by white self-appointed vigilantes, or shootings by police officers in their homes and streets. But a slow death, a death of the spirit, is a death that is built on racism and intended to humiliate, reduce, and destroy. Racism is indelible to the Black body and the spirit, and the physical and spirit murdering of Black bodies is unfortunately part and parcel of America's history. It is in many ways what makes America, America. So I posit that as Black males, our psyches have been destroyed. So when we talk about psychology, it's not really the study of the mind. If you go back to ancient Kemet, the psyche is the actual soul or spirit murdering. So there's a dearth of Black male teachers because of their experience with racism. So even after they're long gone, Black males are reluctant to exchange their identities for employment in a world that has historically been against them or have never welcomed them. Therefore, Cal State Teach, any other program, there's also implications for school site as instructional leaders. You must differentiate the pre-service and in-service experience to eliminate the cultural discontinuities that exist. So what I want to do now to get more specific is just shift to what I like to call the magic beans that they've been selling us forever, right? At least since 1954. And that is the packaging and commodifying the implicit and explicit practices, right, that supposedly address the achievement gap. So now more recently, that snake oil comes in the form of social emotional learning. Let's be real about it. SEL is seen as a cure-all in a lot of instances, right? So we talk about how students may behave, again, without highlighting the institutional factors that lead to trauma causing the behavior, whether they're inside or outside of the school walls. So therefore, SEL is like a Band-Aid to the proverbial bullet wounds of America's Black children, right? It's the gas mask on a canary in the mine, when in actuality, what we need to do is we need to change the air of the mind. So we need to engage in healing, both physical, spiritual, and we have to deal with the mental trauma of those aforesaid bullet wounds. So I want to dig into SEL a little bit, and I'm watching my time. In a lot of schools that I'm in, and I try to counteract this with my teachers, SEL is used as another form of policing, and it polices Blackness. You see the Black kid sitting in the corner, right? But that kid is not in a place where they feel safe, they'll feel armed academically, and they feel supported. SEL should foster that emotional support. It should foster trust building. There should be a restorative justice component, right? But often those SEL conversations, the curriculum, the practice is based on very white patriarchal norms. And I can add cisgender even. So if you look at the competencies, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, whatever it is, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, right? It's the students who must manage, regulate themselves, must manage and regulate themselves. The students, it is they who must control, suppress, and sequester their emotions. They have to conform and constrict the very person they bring into the classroom. So they have to culturally disrobe before they enter the schoolhouse, right? So an example of, say, social awareness. I bet you tons of us has been in classrooms where it's explained or there's stuff posted, looks print rich, but it's basically keep your hands to yourself. Don't touch anybody, don't touch other people's property, don't speak with other people, don't do this, right? But social awareness and all of the competencies should actually be transformatory or transformative. They should be about unpacking biases, explicit and implicit, and having age-appropriate, very critical dialogue so students can go out and effectuate change in our world, right? So when you see what's happening in classrooms, we have to ask, whose social norms are we abiding by? Whose social norms are we trying to get students to buy into, right? So as you look at the early ages, we should really understand the type of self-soothing expressions that are very semiotic in nature, right? That will help students cope. They should be culturally affirming, and they should really take students back to their ancestry while recognizing and addressing trauma. And it's hard because I think of tons of anecdotes I could share. Another thing about SEL, it's in a silo where it should be woven throughout the day. It should be woven out the curricula. It should be woven throughout relationships where we affirm students, their families, and their communities. This would allow us to move towards equity and injustice, right? So again, there's nothing wrong with the canary. We have to change the air in the mind. Now, this is jumping ahead to some suggestions I have, But I would really suggest, folks, if you haven't, look at the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, right? Where they combine the social emotional learning competencies with culturally responsive pedagogy. I'm not throwing shade at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. I'm not throwing shade at CASEL. What I'm saying is that teachers, schools, and instructional leaders, programs, don't necessarily have that skill set, right, to engage in this culturally sustaining pedagogy that makes social emotional learning work. So here I have to lean on Sean Ginwright, who again talks about healing, like I mentioned before, right? Young people have to be reminded that they are not their trauma. We have to allow them to dream, imagine, to hope, to grow, be creative, be playful, let them be kids, dance, sing, laugh, play, scream, engage in their cultural practices. We have to organize for that for them in the classroom. Encourage the very brilliant ways in which they grow up. Social emotional learning that's devoid of any culturally sustaining pedagogy or any culturally affirming practices is not SEL.
Dr. Stewart, I have
Yes,
a
sir.
quick question for you and Mr.
Yes, sir.
Miller. So over the past few weeks, we've seen played out in a series of videos. Usually I see them on Instagram or whatever, where you see random white women go through a lengthy act, if you will, that starts with aggression and concludes with tears on how they feel assaulted, right? Now, how we've seen this play out in elementary school, even with classroom teachers. What would and Mr. Miller alluded to it when he talked about the numbers of students who are sent to his classroom. What role do we play in stopping that process at a school site? That aggressive behavior that manifests itself into tears and he's threatening me.
Oh, so that leads to some of my conclusions, Brandon, if I could jump right in, right? I think what we see is usually, if you look at Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility, if you look at Cheryl Matthias and she mentions white emotionalities, right? Usually those happen in a counterpunching fashion, right? Something happens and then they counterpunch. But usually I think what's happening there is that they're being the aggressor in the center of the ring, right? And so I honestly think that if you're going to teach Black males in particular, right? Let's be real about it. If you're going to teach Black males in particular, instructional leaders, districts need to provide some emotional support for those teachers. Teaching is hard, right? And then, like Jane Elliott says, if you're all white people are racist, if you're born in America and educated in America and you're not racist, it's a miracle. So you're going and you need some type of therapy to exercise that, right? In a real therapeutic sense. And it's not that we want to lose our teaching core. We want them to be better so they serve every student better. We want them to deal with the student's trauma that's a direct result of oppressive systems, education being one of them. Professional development has to be geared towards understanding equity and justice to get these teachers to confront it, right? Professional development that allows them to self-excavate so that they can fight the racism within themselves. Then you also have to have instructional leaders that are competent enough to guide their staffs in culturally responsible, culturally sustaining pedagogy, anti-racist teaching and engagement, making it a whole way of life instead of a buzzword or a buzz term, right? That's my response to it.
Yeah, and then so I guess jumping in from there, a lot of it has, and I'll speak specifically from my campus and my experiences both at my current school and at my previous school has been being an advocate for the students, because a lot of times, again, especially in elementary, they don't have the emotional inventory to be able to explain why everything's going on. We're adults, so we can sit here and we can talk about our feelings. We can explain why this made me feel this way, so on and so forth. We can explain how we think this came about. We can even, and just your anecdote about being on the elevator, you can even make the connection between what happened there and why that might have been that person's reaction. And so what I try and do as often as possible, especially with kids that I again, because I get sent a lot of students, repeatedly, I'm the caretaker, is when they're with me, we go through what got you here, the series of events that got you here. And it starts with, trying to de-escalate the student so that they don't build this adversarial feeling toward education. Because that's part of the problem, is that our Black boys, again, specifically, feel like it's an adversary. They're enemies with school. They go head to head. They're Autobots and Decepticons, right? That they go to school and their job is just to survive school, which should not be the feeling, because you're not learning when you're in survival mode. You're protecting yourself. And so the aggression comes from the fight or flight. You feel like you're protecting yourself to try and make it through the end of the day, and that shouldn't be the feeling. And once we start to de-escalate that and get them to talk about how they feel, why do they feel, so on and so forth, then I go back to the teacher with the kid and I say, listen, this is what I'm hearing. You know what I mean? We talked about buzz terms and buzzwords, and we've talked about what's the thing with counsel, where you have the restorative justice, so on and so forth, and they use that from child to child. But a lot of teachers don't see it as something that they need to be using from child to teacher as well. And so what we try and do is, this is what I've heard, this is what I'm hearing when I deal with it this way, and again, explaining some of the background, because again, a lot of teachers, I don't believe inherently mean to have these biases, but as I've seen in the comments, as you guys have mentioned, a lot of it is built into how we're taught to teach. A lot of it is built into how we're taught to operate in society. And so there are a vast majority of people that think it's just enough to not be racist, as opposed to being anti-racist or anti-bias. They need to not only just, oh, well, I'm not going, no, you need to be actively working toward destroying these biases, whether it's within yourself or within, somebody, a coworker that you see, because, if not, then what's going to keep happening is they're going to keep butting heads. They're going to keep butting heads. And after, month 2, then they're just going to, the teacher's going to spend the rest of the year just trying to get this kid out of their class. And I'm just trying to get to the end of the school year so I don't have to see him no more. And I'm just, and again, I make it a point to try and make it so that these kids know, no matter what grade they're in, if they need to come to talk to me, they need to come talk to me, and we'll work through it together. But these kids are kids. They need advocates. And the parent can't be there all day, every day. And sometimes the teacher's not going to understand why they're so angry, and, so on and so forth. Sometimes it takes the teacher being a little bit more of an advocate. And I think it starts more so before class starts. So in these professional developments over the summer, over, those meetings on Wednesdays or whatever the case may be, bringing it up as often as possible and building it in. Like you said, being culturally responsive to, they're not being aggressive or they're not being angry. It's just that they play a little bit more aggressively than other kids. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently wrong with the way a child, expresses themselves, except for if you attach a value to it. So just because I yell, or I talk louder, you take it as yelling, but in my house, there's always 7 people. So I got to talk loud for people to hear me. They're not getting that. And so, you know what I mean? We've got to be the advocate for these students so that they understand that there is somebody on their side, and helping them understand the emotional importance of them being able to be an individual. One of the comments I saw was, you know, where do our Black kids get to make mistakes and learn from it instead of being punished for it all the time?
Right, right. So I want to thank you both. We're going to bring our other two panelists back and continue this conversation. So don't go anywhere. We have more questions for you too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your stories, and we appreciate this opportunity. So one of the questions that came in first, it's specific to supporting non-Black educators of color, asking how can they assist Black students without putting more emotional labor on Black male educators?
So, you know, and Dr. Stewart and I kind of have a difference of opinion here. My frame of reference is, my job's not to educate you. Your job is to figure out your issues and work on your issues. I firmly believe, in all honesty, that racism is not my problem. I didn't create it. I don't live it day to day. I don't have to deal with, you know, because I can go home. Not that that's going to keep me safe, as we now know, but you know, it's your problem, and you need to fix it. You created it. That's like me burning my dinner and saying, "What's for dinner?" You know, you created this problem. You need to fix it, but you can't have me fix the problem for you. So, you know, we all got, well, most of us got that same education in elementary school, whereas, you know, someone in that school indicated that that Black boy was bad or that Black girl was bad. And we carried that with us. You know, we carry that. Then we become teachers and we do the same thing, regardless of your ethnicity. So you're bringing that in with you, even though you're a person of color yourself, because you remember that piece. Well, they have to be bad because they were always in the office. You're a child, so you didn't see the trajectory of what happened to that young man or that young lady in that context. You just knew that the teacher said they were bad. So that's something, you know, as Dr. Stewart alluded to earlier, you know, that's something that needs to be rectified in the teacher preparation program. That's something we need to address in the teacher preparation program, and we need to address directly. You know, we kind of talk around it sometimes, and we give it really nice words. SEL, I think Dr. Stewart said, you know, we give it these really fancy words, but we never say, listen, I need you to not treat someone in that way. I need you, if you're going to be a teacher, I need you to recognize the gifts that these children bring to this classroom. So that's just to start, Dr. Stewart.
No, I think listening to you, I mean, we do have some overlap. But I think that when we're in certain positions, we do have to guide our candidates because then we know they're coming in as, I hate the term implicit bias. I'm sorry. We know they're coming in with implicit biases. We know they're coming in as racist. We need to handle it there, and we need to guide them along the way. Now, if we're colleagues, right? Nah, it's not my job to teach you. You're here, I'm here. Now, if you want to kick it with me and see what I do, then you're more than welcome, right? And just watch and learn. So, but here's another thing Dr. Black and I always talk about. It comes up regularly. I won't say every time. But there's been tons written on specific topics. We already know what to do. And that's what I mean by preparation programs and instructional leaders holding their candidates and their staff's feet to the fire to do right by every single child in that classroom. I mean, in their classrooms in the school building.
So I know I'm not on this panel, but I am a non-Black person of color educator and teacher educator. And so I just wanted to add a couple cents into this as like in that positionality, right? And I think that both Dr. Black and Dr. Stewart are saying, we as non-Black people of color educators, and I would extend this to white educators as well, we need to do our own work to address the anti-Blackness that we are steeped in within our culture, right? So we need to actually read Black authors, right? The answers are out there for us. We need to cite Black authors. I've been really influenced by a lot of Black feminist thought. If you don't know about Black joy and Black intellectual history, read Dr. Bettina Love, read Dr. Goldie Muhammad, right? Find the work of Dr. Walter Allen. We have some things that we're going to talk about later about things you can read, people you can listen to, and then you need to do the work, right? When we ask about how we can not put more emotional labor on Black male educators, well, we need to show wherever we teach, whether it's P through 20, that we value Black student voices, that we value Black educator voices, that we see that there is value. And then we need to teach all of our students, like, we don't have equal positions within this society, and we need to use what privilege we do have to navigate, right? And we all have different assets, but those assets don't necessarily equal to privilege. And so we need to be able to educate ourselves. And I mean, there are simple things you can do, right? In the curriculum, right? Wherever you are in the curriculum, you can center Black joy, right? You don't have to put Black history and Black literature all about the suffering of Black people, right? Like, you can actually give examples of Black joy. You can actually do some of the work of mentoring, right, as a person of color. And obviously, you're not going to do mentoring. I'm not going to do mentoring in the same way as Dr. Stewart is going to do mentoring, right? But you can still be a mentor, right? And you can still do the work that you need to do. You can still unpack not only the biases that you have, but like what it means to be a non-Black person of color in a racist society, right? A society that was founded upon both anti-Black racism and indigenous destruction, right? And so they're both right? We as non-Black people of color educators and as white educators, we need to do our work, right? If we don't want to burden Black male educators, we have to do the work, and at the same time, make the system more inclusive. Because how do you buy into a system that never wanted you from the time you were in preschool all the way through, right? So when we talk about the seed, we have to look at that as well. So sorry, I just had to kind of say that from my own position. I don't know if we have time for another question, but I know, Dr. Stewart, you said that you would answer the question about your thoughts on the mindfulness movement in schools. Did you want to briefly address that?
I actually hit that button by mistake, but it's okay. I'll answer it real quick.
Sorry.
No, I think it's wonderful, right? I think it's something that can very well teach students and educators, practitioners, how to manage their trauma, how to be calm, how to meditate in that space. And that's also something you can get from the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, which yeah, you can get that there. Like I said, I'm not trying to throw shade anywhere because it's not anybody's particular fault. It's just the way things are implemented. But yes, very, very worth exploring and mastering.
Thank you. So we have one last question we'd like to throw out, and I think Dr. Black, this might be one that you can respond to. It's related to the design of Cal State Teach as a multiple subject credential program, and there's an inquiry about how the program might support strengthening the pipeline into special education teacher recruitment. Maybe this is more of an, is this the part of the vision question?
I will only add that Cal State Teach is, there was not an executive order. What word am I looking for? Cal State Teach is written into law to be what it is. So sometime in the mid-90s, there was a law that the CSU be responsible for an online multiple subject program. So that's the extent of what we can do. You know, we've talked about legislated, thank you. We talked about, you know, special ed and single subject using our same processes, but we'd have to go back to the legislators and refine that original legislation.
I do see that there's one, it's more of a statement, but it actually has me thinking about a question that the other Dr. Howard posed to me that I think may be worth us talking about. The statement is related to the rap culture, one curiosity about how it's impacted our kids, acknowledging that some of us have children who might be aspiring to become musicians or rappers, but also they're obtaining their college degrees. And there's this idea that it's not cool to be a teacher and in the rap culture. I think my question that I would add to that is, again, something that the other Dr. Howard and I talked about, Dr. Keith Howard, is this idea that sometimes pursuing becoming a teacher might be something that's not presented as the thing to do. So wondering what your thoughts might be about how we can support our, you know, young Black students, Black male students specifically, as they're in high school, as they're thinking about who they would like to be, what they would like to do in the future. What is it that we should be saying or doing to encourage the pursuit of becoming educators?
Let me jump in. So that's what I talked about. It has to start in preschool. It has to start in preschool. They have to see you. If they don't see you, and then if you don't do your work or the work, they're not going to want to be like you. You know what I mean? Or be like themselves who want to be teachers. You know, it's not going to happen. I would recommend, like, my son raps too. You know, he's going into a senior year in college, but he also has this trajectory. There's nothing wrong with it. I never sheltered my children. We listen to everything. I'm not hypocritical because I know they're going to hear it from somebody somewhere, right? And then they're going to get it on their phone, but at least we could talk about it, right? You know, we listen to the music together. We talk about it. I share the references with them without dissing current rappers, you know, little such and such and little so-and-so or whatever. I say, this is why you need parity, because you're not going to get, if you listen to Black Star's album, which I don't know, they need to get the second one out, you're going to come away with 10 books. Lil Pump is not going to have you walking away with 10 books. But I'll let somebody else jump in. Inglewood, D Smoke is a teacher, went to UCLA, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, does some very good work in the community. So D Smoke is very much from the hood, from Inglewood, and very much into teaching. And he recognized the culture of the county because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brandon, he was a Spanish teacher, right?
Yeah. So, and I actually know him. So,
okay.
You know, he's a friend of mine, and you know, fluent in Spanish. He's also a music teacher.
Yes.
You know, but he's part of, you know, again, the two parts to the answer are, you know, it's okay to pursue the rap and be educated, but, you know, and referencing being a teacher, like you said, it's kind of like they don't know that Black men can be teachers, so they don't try to be teachers, you know. And then you add to that all of the behaviors that are considered not okay their entire educational career is completely acceptable as a rapper. You talk too much in class, but it's okay to talk as much as you want to when you're a rapper. You know, you move around a lot in class, and where they want you to sit down for 8 hours, and it's not reasonable to ask any kid to do that, but they want you to sit down for 8 hours. You can't sit down, so you get in trouble for it. Well, it's okay to run around on the stage and do whatever. Rap is a form of expression for a group of people who feel like they haven't been heard their entire lives. And so it makes it difficult for them to want to feed into the system of being a teacher where, well, all you gonna do is make other kids like me be in trouble. Well, you know, that's not what it is. They look at it in the same way that they look at becoming police officers. They don't see the benefit in becoming a police officer because they inherently think police officers are bad. They inherently think teachers are bad because of the experiences they've had with them growing up. There was an album that I got last summer. It was called Kids Mic, KIDZMIC. And they're 8 and 9-year-old kids. There's 2 kids, brother and sister, that have recreated a lot of popular rap songs, but age appropriate. So like, you know what I mean? They have like Nas's I Know I Can. They have, you know, a few different songs, but then they're rapping a very positive message about it. And when we talked, what Bettina was saying about bringing in that cultural relevance, letting the kids hear that. I play it for them every morning when we're doing our warm up and letting them know that all this is writing and poetry. All this is responding to a prompt. If somebody said, you know, what kind of things can you do, and you wrote it, but you made it rhyme, that's all rapping is. Bring it. We've Jack and Jilled up the hill for the last 100 years. We know that they got the pail of water, but kids don't know what a pail of water. There's no relevance for a pail of water, but these rap songs and finding these different outlets, finding outlets that are going to uplift you. That D-Smoke album, while I can't necessarily play it for my second graders, you know, at a high school level, that's something that shows you can be educated, you can be multifaceted, you can be fluent in Spanish, you can do all of these things and still, you know, be a teacher. And like, they're not mutually exclusive of one another. You can be a rapper and a teacher. He's showing us that. We've got, you know, rappers that are, Black Thought is teaching a master class on how to rap. You know, we got producers at our HBCUs that are teaching you how to rap and produce. You know, T.I. just got signed on to teach a class at Clark Atlanta. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be the teacher and the rapper, but we have to let them know that you can be the teacher. You know, it took a long while in this country for the country as a whole to accept being the CEO, being the doctor, it wasn't always something that we were allowed to do. And it took for people doing it and then coming back and showing other people that they could do it, that those things can exist. So I think that if we're gonna, you know, we want more, we don't necessarily have to stray them away from rapping to get them to be the teaching. We just have to show them that you can be what you would like to be, and just that we are in all of these spaces that we're talking about.
So I was preparing to move us on, and then the Dr. Keith Howard I was referring to actually just dropped a follow-up and is asking more just pointedly, how about the views of family about their kids going to college and becoming a teacher? Do Black parents encourage their Black boys to become teachers, or do they encourage them to do the something else, you know, whatever that is? So maybe you all could speak to your experiences, even were you encouraged during your upbringing to become a teacher? And, you know, is there more? You guys are smiling. There must be something else that came in.
Well, you know.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
I have 2 sons. One is an engineer, and one is a college junior, studying biomedical laboratory science. Now, they have those majors primarily because I was very involved in their K-12 experience. So that was a job in itself, as the other gentleman on this call will attest to. So making sure that teachers did not derail my children was a job. And I did it every day. Every day. I was either at the school, we need to do this is how this works. This isn't the class we're going to take. This is the class. But when it comes to their careers, and I came into teaching later, I tried a million things. I was successful at some, not so much at others. But I found my way into teaching and I really enjoyed it, so I stayed. When it comes to their careers, that's a choice that they have to make. But they have to live with those the decisions that they make, be it money, how much they pay, or the career trajectory. But I do always tell them, you know, I did pretty well as a teacher. I mean, I put 2 kids through college and you don't have loans. So, you know, it can be done. So I'll let the other gentleman answer.
I think part of it is I don't think that there are a lot of parents advocating for their kids becoming teachers. But again, it goes back to kind of the cycle of what we talk about with the educational system. A lot of parents don't have good experiences with their kids' teacher because they're coming into it with the feelings that they have from school. You know, oh, I was never good at math. Well, it's probably not that you weren't good at math. You just weren't taught the way that you needed to be taught. And so a lot of it is helping our current parents unlearn some of the negative things that got put into them as students when they were students, so that they don't labor that onto their kid. You know, so for me, you know, I came into it with the mindset that I wanted to be part of the difference. And it's just, you know, literally it takes as much teaching the kid as it does teaching the parent, that, you know, sometimes it is what it is, you know. But the other problem is at the end of the day, teachers still aren't getting paid enough. And, you know, it is hard for a kid, especially if you grew up not having a lot of money, to want to go into a position where, you know, they're going to start you off at 42,000. And if I'm an engineer, I could start at 90. You know what I mean? It's less about the parents are encouraging them to go out and be successful. I don't think that there are a lot of parents that are championing against teaching per se, but I think they're just saying, you know, do what makes you feel good, do what makes you happy. But because they don't have a lot of teacher examples to point to, they don't have anybody, you know, if you wanted to be a doctor, everybody knows a doctor somewhere. You want to be a lawyer, everybody knows a lawyer somewhere that you can have your kid talk to the lawyer and the lawyer will tell you, well, this is what I had to do and this is why it was difficult. There aren't enough of us that look like the kids that we're trying to get to become teachers to help usher them into becoming teachers.
May I only add that we need more Black everythings. We need more Black doctors. Maybe we wouldn't, maybe we have better diagnoses when we go into hospitals and emergency rooms. Maybe we wouldn't go into emergency rooms with COVID. They send us home and then we die 3 days later. We need more Black lawyers. We need more Black people to serve on juries. We need more Black everything. So we need to make that space, and education is one of the ways to make that space. So I can help you create those opportunities so that we can have what we need in order to be successful.
Yeah. So this takes us nicely to the next phase where we'd like to talk about how we should respond.
Yeah, and actually Ernest, Dr. Black brought us really well into this we, because one of the questions we had earlier to the panel, right, is who are the we? And the we is different depending on who you are, right? But we occupy different positionalities. So if you are a teacher or an educator of color and you're in this room, you filter things through the lens of your experiences as an educator or a teacher educator of color. You also focus things through your individual experiences, but as individuals, we are parts of institutions, programs, teacher, educators, etc. And so we don't have a lot of time left, but I really want you to, I know people have been kind of typing in the chat about how their minds are blown by the things that Dr. Stewart, Mr. Miller, Dr. Black have brought to us, right? But I really want you to, after we leave you all, with some of these action steps, before you move on to the next thing in your day, I want you to sit with yourself. Somebody asked about mindfulness earlier, and just pause for a moment and take a breath and think about what you're feeling in this moment in your body, right? And sit with that, because there's a chance that those individual feelings are connecting with your experiences, biases, that question that we asked you at the beginning about what you or the institutions that you have been a part of have been doing to fuel Black success or Black destruction, right? But we want to move into some action steps because we promised you action steps and things to do. And so first we wanted to talk about individual action steps. Nicole?
Yep. So I will just briefly say this is a protocol that we're encouraging, which is the do one, which is do one thing, take action, watch and listen to two things, or read, watch, listen to two documentaries, then read 3. And so I'm going to drop the link to, since we are short on time, to just sort of something that outlines, a post that outlines what that means. And then I'm going to move us on to institutional actions.
Yeah, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed institutional action steps because somebody, I believe it was Luciano earlier, said, you know, power is not given, right, without a demand, right? And part of it is we are part of institutions and we have different positions in our institutions. And so we encourage you as part of your doing as an individual to look at what you're doing as in the institutions that you're a part of. Right. And so going beyond solidarity statements that were released in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, what can your institutions do? So one of the things that they can do is support racial affinity groups for Black students and faculty, give people space to come together, to have conversations. Somebody very early in the chat asked us, who is this conversation for? Is it for, like, is there an assumption that it's white teacher educators, Indigenous Black people of color, because we have different conversations, right, in different groups. And so that's one thing. And you'll notice the asterisk next to support, because when we talk about support, a lot of times support can come in the form of lip service, but we want to encourage institutional people with institutional privilege who are in this room to think about support meaning not just words, but money, space, time, and institutional recognition, because you know, this should go in people's tenure files. This should be considered for promotion, right? The work that is being done. We also encourage programs to remove gatekeepers to student success. So I believe Mr. Miller or Dr. Stewart talked about, you know, the standardized tests, right? That are gatekeepers all along the P through 20 pipeline and are gatekeepers to teachers being successful in gaining their credential, right? Gatekeeping program requirements, program counseling that students may need. Support identity work for white educators and teacher educators, as well as non-Black people of color. Support program-wide focus on the implications of white supremacy in education, right? So we need to actually look at not just anti-Blackness, but the foundations and the ways in which white supremacy has reproduced undeniably in the fact that we have 83% or 80% of our teachers being white in this country. And then we need to collect, examine, use, and act upon multiple forms of data that affirm Black identity within our programs and institutions. So we need to stop moving like from a deficit framing, but actually look at what are the assets that Black male educators bring to our programs, to our institutions. As Dr. Black said, we need more Black everything. And we're not going to get more Black everything if we don't build affirming spaces for Black people in our institutions. So we wanted to kind of move you towards that.
Yes, and we'll remind you of the link to these slides for those of you who do want to revisit these institutional steps. And then we have a call to action here for you today, and we'd like to ask that you make a commitment. So we're dropping in the chat now a link to a form. It is specific to making a commitment to learning more about everything we just talked about, and you can find there that you'll be asked to enter in your email address if you like, and we will be a great accountability partner by way of sending you an email about your responses, and we'll wait a little bit to do that because we know sometimes when you leave a webinar that other things come up, and so we'll send that reminder a week from now so you'll get it and you'll remember, oh, this is what I committed to doing. So we hope that you will complete that form for us. We do thank you all for joining us today and being with us to hear this important conversation. And any final words from our panelists?
Yeah, so my final thought is we also know that as an organization, so we want to thank CCTE again for offering us this platform, but we know that we have work to do. And this is just a beginning for our organization to dismantle whiteness, white supremacy, right, and the invasive nature of it in teacher education as well. So please stay tuned. This is just a beginning, and we really look forward to continuing this conversation and this collaboration with all of you. Thank you again to our panelists, Dr. Black, Dr. Stewart, Mr. Miller. We all are just blessed by you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye everyone. Thank you.